2019, and I'm here at Bill Cloutt's house. And Bill, can you tell us where and when you were born and how you ended up here?
I was born in 1952. It's Silver City, New Mexico. My mother was born here in this valley, and my came to this valley. My mother's family came to this valley in 1935, and I've spent my entire life, except for 2 years, ranching or up somewhere up and down the state line from here. We've had ranches up as far north as the Mogollon Rim, and I was born in Silver City, raised in Glenwood, New Mexico. We had a ranch on the state line there, and I taught vocational agriculture in northeast New Mexico in 1975 to 1977, and I I came back down, desert rat, couldn't stand the cold and the winds in the high plains country, and I've spent most all of my life working for myself or working for the ranch, the family ranch, except for my 2 years of teaching vocational ag. And my grandparents, as I said, came from the west side of the Chiricahuas over here with, I think, as the story goes, 10 head of Hereford cows and 2 workhorses. Mm. And that's how they moved to this country.
Do you have any like stories or memories of your grandparents and the ranch, or
Oh yeah,
things you could tell us?
My grandparents, when they first moved here, they moved into a place in Skull Canyon. That country up there was homesteaded by the Nolans, and we bought it. My grandparents bought a homestead from them in Skull Canyon, and then just kept buying other little parcels and he started ranching in the Palencias and then moved into the valley, and my mother, they moved down in the valley when my mother was started high school. She went to grade school at Apache, Arizona, the same place my daughters went, and she went to high school at Animas and graduated in Animas as a valedictorian. My daughter went to school at Apache, went to school at Animas, graduated at Animas as valedictorian when she was there. And
when your mom was at Apache, I think you were saying earlier, there was 1 or 2 students.
Yeah, there was, when my oldest daughter was there was 4 students. And when my mom was there, it fluctuated, but sometimes there was 7 or 8 students, and sometimes there was just 3 or 4. But I'm going to put a plug in for the Apache School. It's produced a surgeon, a lawyer, and a executive for Nature's Bounty, a quality control manager. And so the Apache Schools produced some and that's just the few that I come to my mind right now.
Back to your grandparents, do you know much or can tell us about Skeleton Canyon or ranching up there? Or what?
Okay, my granddad's dad came to America from Austria and landed on Ellis Island. And he came across the United States, and he was a miner, hard rock miner. He was always prospecting, and they had he prospected. They had a little farm and stuff over on the west side of the Chiricahuas. And then he and my grandmother moved over here, and then they ranched in Skull Canyon and out in the flats. It predominantly was, they bought it from the Nolans, and we had, uh, the Millers were our neighbors on the north, and the Kimballs were our neighbors Kimballs and the Snewers on the south. And I still own or still have the ranch, and we've added to it. We bought and leased a lot of country in the bottom of the valley here that used to belong to. Well, it belonged to the Mosu Cattle Company or something. Anyway, it was the Fred Darnell, and them was our neighbors, and then Bert Roberts. He was an old timer that lived here, and they bought. Right now, we've ended up with some of Bert Roberts' old country, and that's how we got here.
Well, tell me about growing up and ranching and what life was like. Yeah.
Well, I was kind of unique. My grandparents bought the rodeo grocery, and I forget who it was, way back in the early 50s. But before they had the grocery, they had the hotel and a cafe and the rodeo hotel. And I can remember it had big hardwood staircase going upstairs, and I can just barely remember it when I was small. The Millers had the post office was in one corner of it, and I was probably 10 years old or less.
Was the hotel a big thing? I can't think of because of the train or
The hotel was a big. It was because of the train. Rodeo was really a rodeo sighting where they had a set of stockyards there, and that's where they had a set of stockyards at Apache, and and that's where the ranchers would drive their cattle to the railhead and put them on and that's where the rodeo, and then they, right about the time I was in the early 50s, they started drilling and started farming, and they still today that's one of the that's probably the big industry is agriculture here in the valley.
so your grandparents originally had the hotel, and then you were starting to say then they bought the store from somebody?
Yes, they bought the store. They sold the hotel, bought the store, and it was kind of a general store. It had some hardware, it had a little bit of lumber, it had some bolts, nuts, and things like that. And it was a meeting place for the valley. Had the only telephone, had the old box wooden phone booth with the first time I can remember it. It wasn't the two-piece phone where you talked into a speaker.
That's what I was thinking of.
It was, they changed it. It might have been there, but I don't think, because where I can remember it is there was no phone or something. It was like you picked up the phone, an operator answered.
Yeah.
I want to talk to BR 549 or whatever.
Yeah, you didn't dial it.
There wasn't no dial.
Yeah.
And it was the only phone in the valley. And I can remember the Snewers and the Kimballs and everybody come up there to use the phone. This was in the early 50s, and I can remember and then the Saturday night fights, the boxing matches on TV.
Oh,
They had my grandparents had a old black and white. I mean, it was the newest and the latest, and they had a black and white TV that was more snow than anything, and they'd watch the Saturday night fight. On everybody'd come to the store.
it was a big community thing.
And everybody come to the store and visit and sit and watch Saturday night fights. That was the gathering.
Yeah.
And I was a very small. I wasn't 10 years old when
Yeah.
they had that.
Well, you have other memories of what rodeo was like, or community things? That were
Yeah, I can remember. This. I didn't go to school at rodeo. They had a school there, and then, but they had a little grade school, and then they built a newer grade school, and then pretty soon they figured it was cheaper to send the kids to Animas than it was to keep the school going, and so they went to school at Animas after they got out of. And at rodeo, the kids that weren't even, they all went, even if they were first or second grade, they went to Animas. But if they were in Portal, had a school, and they went to school at Portal. They went to school at rodeo, and went to school at Apache. There was, just as the story goes, I think there was around 20 kids at the big time at each one of the schools.
And that was like the 50s in there?
It was like the late 40s, early 50s,
Yeah.
because I think it was in later 50s they sent the kids to Animas.
Oh, okay. And that would have been, at the time, there was a combination of ranch families and people working on the railroad.
Mhm.
I know I talked to a few people there. I mean, that was sort of the population of what people were doing back then.
Yes, it was agriculture, ranching, farming.
Oh, okay. Well, so what was the agriculture? What crops were they?
It started out, and they was dryland farming, and plants have to have moisture, and so the dryland farming didn't work too good. But then
Yeah.
I can remember when
excuse me. What would you on a dry land farm? What are you growing?
They would combine. My grandfather would talk about the Kimballs and the Snewers and them and Bert Roberts, and they would combine and put up hay, natural grass hay, right down here in the valley.
Okay, so hey.
And then they started, and they drilled one irrigation well just west of Rodeo, just across the state line, and that well still pumps. It's well, use it just for stock water and stuff now with a submersible, but I can remember when a fellow named Dewey Bryce, or before him there was a Bill Hogue that owned that property, and Dewey Bryce, and we've had it for 30 some years. But anyway, rodeos never went plumb broke, but it never set the world on fire. It was, I guess, the main thing at rodeo had several people the Darnells. They were rodeo people and ranchers, and they were world champions, and they got. And then we had the Kimballs here in the last 20 years ago and stuff. They had some Don Kimball. They went to the national finals in team roping and stuff.
Really? I'm going to go back a little bit because you started to talk about when the first well was drilled, and I think what I'm wondering, then more people drilled wells, and then that changed in some way. What was
Yes,
grown, or what happened?
they found they could get water, and so that changed to where, I mean, it wasn't nothing like today where you had water. If these wells pumped 400 gallons a minute, that was an enormous amount of water back in the day.
Yeah.
And then and it started the farming in this. They grew cotton, they grew hay, they grew a few grains, and mainly it was, there was the cotton gin there at Rodeo, and I can remember when it was built, and that was the big deal, and they started producing some cotton.
So cotton gin, if I understand it, is you take the raw cotton that's picked and it separates out.
It separates the cotton out from the seed, cotton seed, and everything.
Yeah.
And no, they had that, and then it would put it in 500-pound bales or 400-pound bales and ship it to the clothing,
Yeah.
to the mills.
Yeah. How long did cotton? You don't see much of it anymore. How long did the cotton growing last for?
I'm not a farmer.
Yeah.
Very well, but you have to cotton. You have to grow it, replant it every year. They go through and it's an annual, and they'd replant it. Then they put in some alfalfa, which is a perennial.
Yeah.
And then they put in some grains and different things, and then all back in the 80s, they grew produce here: watermelons, pumpkins,
Really?
winter squash. They grew some here on this farm. That we had irrigation wells here, and we leased it out, and they grew squash and watermelons.
Where would they ship the produce to?
Nogales.
Okay.
And that's what got them is the freight. They was paying the same for produce from here as they were paying from over there south of, around Tucson or Eloy or toward in the valley.
Yeah. It's
And
too expensive.
and so the freight, they tried, all kinds of things, and the freight killed them.
Yeah.
Because you wasn't anywhere on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though the railroad went, it's just.
Yeah, the railroad was. I was here when they shut it down. The railroad was mainly for Phelps Dodge to ship their smelted copper to their wire plant, or where they used it, processed it over in El Paso, and that was their.
So they weren't shipping. So I'm not right. They weren't shipping produce really. It was more the copper
Yeah, that's what the railroad was, and cattle.
and cattle.
They load cattle. A humorous thing, I got one time. My dad was a cattle buyer, and he loaded some cattle at Rodeo, and then he had some cattle to load on the trains at Apache. And the engineers and everybody on the railroad knew of my grandparents and everything, and the store and the depot and everything. And anyway, the engineer let me ride up on the engine from Rodeo to Apache, and I about drove him crazy. I was only about 6, 7 years old, and I pulled the horn all the way down. They said you could hear me for 5 miles.
That's a great story. How far is it between Apache? I don't know.
Oh, 10, 12 miles.
Okay. Yeah.
And I got to ride, and I thought I got to sit in the engineer's seat and blow the horn.
Oh.
And I thought I was big time.
Yeah.
And another humorous story about the railroad, the mail, I have some pictures in my store of the old depot, and the mail was in the canvas bags, and
Yeah.
they would hook the one on here and throw the other out.
A mail stop or whatever.
Yeah,
Whistle stop.
whistle stop, and they'd come blowing through there. Well, one time they threw the mail out. It rolled back under the train, and the train busted it and scattered mail for half a mile out of Rodeo. Every little kid in town went. They hired every little kid in town to go help gather up mail that was scattered. And then after the trains quit running, and they everybody, every rancher in the valley got his fill of railroad ties from the tracks.
Yeah, I've seen them for.
And the only thing left was the depot. And
I was going to ask you, Bill. Do you have any memories of the depot, or can you describe it? Or?
yeah, there's some pictures in the store of the depot, and I can remember going over to the depot, and they had a person that worked in the office there. I don't remember ever any. I'm sure there might have been, but I don't know about passenger cars.
I was going to ask you that.
I don't. I'm sure they probably did, but I don't ever remember it for sure. Yeah. But they had a depot there at Rodeo, and it would stop and everything, and I can't remember what they ever hauled out there. That there was a set of stockyards there.
Yeah. And how often did the ranchers?
Usually in the fall. Okay. Usually in October, November, they'd gather and ship the calves.
Tell me about ranching. I don't know anything about ranching. How
ranching.
Do you make a living ranching, and what do you do?
You don't make a living; you just exist. Ranching's not a business; it's just a way of life. I'm a fifth generation rancher, and it's the best way of life that you can have. I mean, your independence. It's got very tough with all the government restrictions and the government this, and just like any kind of business.
What makes it the best way of life, though?
You're
independent.
You're independent. You're outdoors. You're not punching a clock, and it's amazing how the harder you work, the more successful you are at it. And
yeah, so if you work hard, you can see the fruits.
And it's you got baby calves in the spring, and you're seeing life grow, and it's just, as I said, I taught vocational agriculture for 2 years, and I worked as a welder for a couple of years for the mine up in Morenci. Everything else I've been, and I bought my first cows, my own cows, when I was 8 years old.
Was this like what's the FFA or something?
Well, this was before that. Okay. This was just I went to the bank and borrowed the money and bought 5 cows, and then after that year, then I bought 5 more, and I had 10 that I was running, and I haven't ever seen the clear side yet, but I know there's one on it. But ranching's just a way of life. You don't punch a button. If you want somebody to stop and want to give an interview, you can do it. You don't have a boss taking care of it. Yeah. And if something's wrong, like you just do it. And if they want to visit while you're working, well, they can. Oh yeah, everybody, neighbors. You can't with neighbors. I was right this year. I was right at the start of gathering shipping season, which usually starts in October and usually ends at the end of the year. Staggered through there. different ranches, and everybody, neighbors, and you help them ship, and then they help you ship, and it takes up about 60 to 90 days
to do what? To get
to get the calves off the cows, get the calves processed, and you give them a vaccination to just help prevent them from getting influenza, and then and get them on to eating grain and stuff and off of mother's milk.
how, I don't know, the one thing I was thinking from the way you described it, you wouldn't change the way you lived for anything.
No, no, there's nothing. I always had I've worked probably 3 years of my life that I actually drew a paycheck. Now I worked at the ranch and I'd get a draw.
What's the difference? What does that mean?
A draw is just it's your paycheck, but it's just you the your family, they pay you for your work. You know what I'm saying?
And then you get that when you need it.
Yeah,
Once a month,
there's
at
a
the end of the
different.
year,
Either way,
when
just
the money's there.
yeah, when the money's there,
Yeah.
and no, you got, and that's another reason why ranchers neighbor and help each other is it stops a great cash flow that you have to go out with hiring help, and help is hard to come by.
Why is that?
It's better now than it was 20 years ago. I don't know. There's a lot of youth back in the ranching business in the last 10 years that have ranching was about to die out. Everybody was getting old.
You're talking in the valley here.
Well, everywhere, nationwide, everything, everybody back in the 80s and the 70s and everything, ranching and agriculture, it's always been tough. And these kids, especially city kids and stuff, they every week or every month, or they expect this X dollars, and here on the ranch, you may not have $0, but your credit and your your reputation, your credit, your everything like that. That's what's more important than dollars. I can remember my grandparents' store. They had a little ticket book for everybody there. They had a little box for like the A's and B's and C's, and then like that. And when my grandparents had the store, it was kind of a general store. He'd go if somebody needed pipe or lumber or something. He had an old truck, and he'd go to El Paso or wherever, Tucson or wherever needed to be to get the materials. And there was, the farmers and the ranchers, you carried them.
Yeah. So your grandparents would carry my credit
Till
until I got the money when I sold the calves.
right, or
And then
harvested the crop.
Yeah, and then I come in and pay off my debt too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's real.
And
did they sell feed there? Or?
Yeah, they might sell feed. They might sell. My granddad, it was kind of a little general mercantile. It sold horseshoes and feed and a little bit of grain, and and then they sold food and different stuff. And
you were saying were there about getting people to help on ranches? Were there people that just traveled around like I would think of cowboys that just moved around that are moving?
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
That's what, there is cowboys that do that on these big ranches that, like the Gray Ranch over here, they have cow camps, and and Geronimo Ranches, which is owned by Walmart, that are bought everything out south of us, and they hire cowboys. They have them a place, one of the old ranch houses. They live there, and
Was it like that in your era, though, in the heyday of ranching? Guys that travel around, or no? You pretty much.
there was always some guys that just drifted, and they'd go help this ranch, and then they had 2 or 3 horses in a trailer or a truck, and they'd go day work for 30 days here to help somebody get shipped, and then ranch we had up by Morenci, we had there was 7 guys that would come work for my dad up there, and down here everybody neighbored down here, and we'd go work your cattle, and then we'd get them all ready, and or spring branding. Everybody would neighbor, and used to everybody neighbor, and the wives would make a great big old lunch and bring over to you, and everything, and it was kind of a community gathering, or it was kind of a social event. Branding was, and then back in the '60s and '70s, you could, in '60s and early '70s, you couldn't find anybody that wanted to work on a ranch, or all the ones that they were either getting old, and the young ones that cared. There was a gap in there, and it was hard to find help. But and then they started, and then there's the new generations come along that they're the ones that stuck it out, and then there was a new generation that's come along that are working, and working for these big ranches, and then there's still little crews that you can hire and be 3 or 4 guys and just day work.
You said the branding was kind of a community thing that wives would.
Or shipping,
Yeah.
delivering the cattle in the fall, or branding in the spring.
Yeah.
You usually work 3 or 4 days, and one day the day you shipped, or like you might brand 100 calves in one day, if you had the crew to do it. And then they always had, everybody eat. You had roast and a big meal.
Yeah, like a celebration is what it was.
Yeah, it was
really
just
hard.
together.
Yeah.
Just when you harvested and you gathered, and everybody, and you might take you a day or 2 days, but always and shipping today, that delivering cattle out in the fall, it's the same way, and it's got to where it's kind of come back to that again.
In what ways? That cycle's happening?
Yeah, like for a while you couldn't find a crew to work cattle that you knew was a good crew of cowboys. Now I don't know why, but there's in the age from 15 or 16 in school up to 25, there was the younger end of it, and they travel, and the ones that were in the younger age, 25-year-olds and stuff, they'd travel and go have a circle, like they'd help me brand, and then they'd move over to another ranch and just kind of a custom harvest type deal. I have one of my pastures down here, that one of the old rancher I bought it from, Guy Miller. He said that when he was a kid, he could remember them gathering, they called it the horse trap, gathering the pasture with all their brood mares and their colts, and they'd come in with the crew of cowboys, and he said they may have 200 mares there, rope the colts, brand them, take, and get them weaned and take them, grow 'em, to grow out. And he said San Simon Cattle Company. He said they probably had 200 mares here in the valley, and down here on my kind of the middle of that ranch that I bought from Guy. It was that pastures and where they'd have throw all them mares and.
Because I heard a story somebody was telling me that in the day San Simon they worked the whole valley and they
from all the way to the Mexican border.
Yeah, that's what it's. So I was just curious.
Yeah, they were big,
Yeah.
huge ranching operation.
Yeah. And the other question I had, Bill, was when, say, you're branding kit, or anyway, you're bringing them all in. Were there any sort of I don't know, entertainment, dances, celebrations, other things?
Oh yeah, like over southeast of us here, there was a little community called Cloverdale, and people would ride horseback over the mountain here to go to Cloverdale to the dances back in the 50 years ago, or 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Did you ever go to them?
No, I went to them back when you drove to them, but
Yeah.
they'd ride over the mountain. They had a trail over down here. And
why would they go to Clover? What was in Clover?
I was just a dance, a little, kind of a community at one time, and had a big, had a building there, and it was just at the store. I have a picture in there. And I think there's 39 or something. Anyway, people at the like 1933 Cloverdale picnic.
Does Cloverdale, is it there now?
Belongs to the Diamond. It's in the Diamond A Cattle Company over there, and it's on their property, and I mean it's locked off. But the old dance hall, I think part of it's still there. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's neat. What a lifestyle, like you said.
That's it is. You're not in it for the money.
Yeah, it's a hard life, but it's a good life.
It's a good life. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I always had my family had a fella that they had a philosophy that if you're working for somebody else, you're worth twice as much working for yourself, if you'll put it to use. And except for 2 years of teaching VOAG, I've been self-employed my whole life. Haven't ever been rich. I may drive a truck till they're 15 years old, but that's fine.
When did you and Nancy buy the store?
Oh, we bought it. Golly, it's been 17 years ago, something like that. And we bought it for my youngest daughter.
Oh, I was going to ask you why.
And we bought it. She'd worked for the previous owner, and she went out and she decided she wanted to come home. So we bought the store. Lloyd was wanting out, and so we bought the store. And then not very long afterwards, that she got killed in a auto accident. And so
you guys have decided to
you
decided to keep it going.
We just decided to keep it. I had 2 daughters. My other daughter is she's kind of I don't know what her title is. She works for a big company that makes protein drinks and this health food and stuff, and she's the quality control of the whole company, and it has 9 plants scattered in North America. And she's usually every other Thursday evening she gets on a jet and flies to, it could be to Fort Worth, it could be to Winnipeg, Manitoba, it could be to Reno. She had real good teachers. Her best friend there was Roland Snewer, which is from the Snewers down at Skeleton Canyon. He and my daughter Shauna, they hit it off from the time I was 3 years old, or 5 or 6 years old. And anyway, he's a surgeon, and she's a quality assurance for Nature's Bounty, which is that big, you've seen it.
Yes, I have.
And she works for them. She lacks 4 years of being able to retire.
You know, I didn't ask you, the house where we're visiting today, when did you move here? When did you and Nancy build your house? Did you buy it or where?
No, this trailer, we had a little 12 by 60 that was here. And it was fine when it was just her and I. Then we had 2 girls. And a 12 by 60 and 2 girls and 2 or 3 dogs, you just didn't have room. And so I bought this trailer used from in at Douglas and brought it out here. And
what era was that? What year?
it was moved back here in 1980. It was about 81, 82. And anyway, it's we've redid it outside. It can't be moved now. It's pretty permanent, and I know it's nothing fancy, but it serves a purpose, and it's home.
It's home. It's home. That's all.
And we have that house over there, my grandparents' house, and my daughter or my grandkids won't stay over there because they say it's haunted by my grandparents.
So nobody lives in your grandparents'?
Nobody lives in there. It's a guest house, and
okay.
we have there'll be somebody coming over, coming through or something, and they'll stop visit with us and stay through. And I had some friends out of Whitefish, Montana, come down and spend a week and a half over there, and it's just nobody. I guess it's spooked because that's where my grandfather, he died in a pasture right down below here.
In a heart attack?
Yeah, he was in a pick. I got in from working cattle. It's kind of an amusing story. I got in from moving cattle, and my grandmother passed away, and my mother was living over there with him to take care of him. And I came in, and she says, "You better go look for your grandfather." He always was in at 11 o'clock, ready for lunch. And so we went, and I looked down the pasture, and there was a truck sitting out there. He went down and pulled cuckleburs. He was 90-some years old, and had the whole bed of the truck full of cuckleburs. He came through a gate, shut the gate, got in his truck, and just apparently right after he got in the truck and started it off, he had a heart attack, and he just fell over, and that truck just ran out in the pasture and quit.
I think that's a good way to go.
I mean, what a way to go. And he...
doing what you love.
Yeah, and I went, and he was... and he went, and I called the EMTs, and they come down and everything, and I said, but you have to for the coroner and everything. They said, "Well, what do you think he died from?" And I said, "He run out of gas. He just, when you're 90-some years old, you just finally going to run out." And anyway, but he was the same man the day he died as he was 25 years ago.
Physically, you mean?
Mentally, he was
sharp.
He was just an old, hard-working German that Austrians, where his dad came from, was Austria. Yeah. And he was just an old, hard-working there. Nothing he'd rather do than just do it go out and do hard physical labor. And if it was the hard way, he was notorious for picking the hard way to fix anything.
'Cause it was the best way, I guess.
Yeah, but he was a man of, he just was Bill Cambridge. He was a man of his word. He'd do anything for anybody, and he wouldn't hardly let anybody do anything for him. And he was, he was just a hardworking old Austrian. And my grandmother, they had the store back in the 50s,
Right.
and everybody knew her from the store. And
So they were ranching then, and also doing the
they had the store.
Did your grandmother, was it sort of so that your grandmother worked the store and your grandfather worked the ranch? I mean,
Yeah, that's kind of the same way and my grandmother, she was a character.
Why do you say that?
Oh, she smoked Viceroy cigarettes and drank big old glass bottles of Coke.
Yeah.
That they have.
Yeah.
Now they come out with them again. And she'd have one of them sitting on the counter. She'd have probably usually 2 cigarettes, one in the tray, and she forgot it, and she was smoking a cigarette. And she was a character. Somebody come in and, well, what the hell do you want today? That was her greeting to her. And I mean, the Darnells, the Kimbells, everybody loved Margaret to death because you never had any doubt of where you stood with her. That's kind of the way I am, and that's really the way my grandmother was. She was quite a character. Well, I can remember our neighbors, the Millers, had a pet lion back in mountain lion. A cub that they'd grown, and he was growing up, and he was, probably weighed 25 pounds, and every once in a while they bring him down, and he'd go to the store with my grandmother, over to my grandmother, and he'd lay on the counter over here.
Like a dog might follow you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a big house cat. He'd lay over there and purr and everything, and every once in a while somebody come in that he didn't like, he'd hiss and spit, and my grandmother would whack him with now, Tom, shut up. Whack him with the magazine. And anyway, I can remember the lion because I was about 5 or 6, I guess, and I can remember and that the Millers had the post office right next to the store in the old hotel, and every once in a while she'd bring the lion down or he would bring him down to go get the mail and stuff, and then he'd make him. Anyway, Tom, I can remember him. He was a character. And
Tom the cat.
Tom the mountain lion, and they sold him he went to Walt Disney, and he was, you probably, if you ever watched any of the movies with the mountain lion, that was probably him.
That's funny. That's funny.
And some people he really liked him, and other people he didn't.
And he let you know.
Oh, and he'd let them know. I mean,
that's a great story. That's a great
and rodeo, the store and stuff, and rodeo was very prosperous during the Bracero program.
What's that?
It was where the government helped pay for the Mexican workers to work on these farms and stuff.
About what era is that?
It would have been in the early 60s. A lot of the products and stuff, the Bracero program, it was, it gave the Mexicans a job. It came out legal. They give them a job. And the one thing you had to have on that Bracero, I think, I don't remember, I was just a little kid, but you had to have a facility for them.
To live in.
to live in.
Yeah.
Right. It helped the rancher and it helped
Yeah.
or the farmer,
Yeah.
and it helped them, and because they had a labor pool
Yeah.
and the Bracero program, and like I can remember my grandparents at the store, they had everybody that had a credit there had a ticket book with their name wrote on it. And they, like with some of the ranchers, some of the farmers, they only paid their bill maybe twice a year. And
You know, I always wondered how, if you're the owner of the store, how do you make it go? You have to have enough money to make it through because everybody's going to pay you. A lot of people are going to pay about the same time.
yeah,
Crops come in or the cow.
yeah. Well, I tried to keep it a charge account there, and with the way the economy is today, I couldn't afford to.
Yeah.
And it's all it is a community service. I mean, it's a community service, a community get together place. The cafe is a place, somebody can come in and visit, do whatever they want.
I want to talk about, or have you talk about dogs and working dogs on the ranch, because I think that's really interesting.
Well, there's dog, as you said just now, there's dogs and there's working dogs.
Okay, well, what's the
And
difference?
my granddad always had dogs. They rode in the front seat. They rode,
They were pets.
they were they were companions.
Yeah, there you go.
They went anywhere he went and everything, and they were companions. And working dogs is where you take those companion dogs, but generally they're working dogs first, and then they become a companion dog. And that's my dad, as I said, one of my relatives back in the, I don't know, 1800s or something, when you had the flash pan in the camera.
Yes.
I have a picture somewhere, and it's one of my relatives sitting with the ruffled shirt, had all of that, had the flat brim, flat topped hat, and he had a big old Walker Hound sitting on the bench with him. And the Clouts have been known for having dogs forever.
And that dog was a working dog.
And he was a working dog.
I mean,
Well, the best way I've found to train a working dog is find a mentor that he can follow. An older dog. And some dogs will make working dogs, and some dogs, no matter what, it's not cut out for them. It's very genetic. If you need cow dogs or lion dogs, you can either need a real aggressive one, or if you want one that just wants to work cattle, kind of like a or Aussie or something, or border collie that help drive. And then there's also hold-up dogs, which are what if you ranch in the mountains, generally have.
What that is?
It's usually a blackmouth cur or a Catahoula. They out of Louisiana and South Texas, where the extremely thick brush, hard places, and all they do is they prevent cattle from running off, running from you, and they'll hold them. You get there, the cattle settle down. You start out, the dogs will help you watch, and after they get older dogs, they'll watch and they'll be behind you driving the cattle out. But if something decides to want to run off, they'll just kind of ease out there on their own. It's something they just inherit. And then, but down in the valleys here in the open country, unless you just have to go catch some wild cattle, the shepherd type dogs, the Australian shepherd, the border collie.
Because you're using the dogs down here
to drive cattle.
Move them or drive them.
And you use the dogs in the mountains for hold-up dogs.
Gotcha. remember telling a story before about your dad, how he got a dog or he needed a couple of dogs.
Yeah, they're very expensive, and we were in the middle of a big work, and we were out of dogs. I mean, our dogs were just exhausted. We lost
But you
one.
didn't have enough dogs?
Yeah, we just didn't have enough dogs because you could only work one every third day. You had to let them rest. It was extremely tough conditions, and everybody, you go buy a good young dog that offers somebody that had the reputation, the bloodlines, and you'd go buy a good young dog at less than a year old, and you might get one that started, or you might give a, a bunch just for a pup.
How much would I pay for one in those days?
Well, for a pup, might cost you, if it was that, he'd cost you $300 or $400. But then if you needed a dog that was started but needed more work, he might probably cost you $800 to $1,000. And then if you needed an A-string dog that was ready to go to work right then, or was working, and then that dog would probably cost you $3,000. And this was back in the 70s. I mean, but those dogs would pay for themselves.
How would they?
Just wear and tear on cowboys and horses and everything else.
Yeah, so they could do the job.
They could do the job that you had to have another cowboy or something there, or they could do a job that you couldn't do. Like in the brush and cattle trying to get away or something.
How many dogs would you have at any one time when things were really going on the ranch?
Well, between our hunting dogs and our cow dogs, we had and pups, females with pups. When we were up on the ranch up on Upper Eagle Creek, we had 32.
Wow.
But we had 2 litters of pups, which made up 10 or 12,
Yeah.
and then we had hunting hounds for hunting, and then we had 3 or 4 cow dogs, usually one good one or couple of learning, or two good ones and one would rest. But we used to buy. There was a neighboring ranch and our ranch up there, and we bought Purina dog chow by the semi-load.
And how long would that last? Is that a year?
Oh, it lasts. Well, they'd take half a load, and we'd take half a load, and I think they had like 30 dogs, and we had like around 34, 36 counting pups. It was the most we ever had. But working dogs, we had when Dad was help working and guiding and stuff besides our cattle ranch. You've got to have something to supplement a ranch. Uh, you know,
Cash or money? Or
yeah, like a lot of people help make the ranch work by leasing the hunting rights on it, like down in Texas. Another thing is it helps. They'll take out hunters, or and like the Glens they're down by Douglas. They've been in their third generation. Warner Glenn and his yeah.
Yeah. So one way to supplement it was to lease the hunting. What were they hunting? What animals, and who would lease them?
Or who would go hunting.
Yeah.
Usually the animals with hounds. Now, when we were up above Clifton, my dad's specialty was running bears and running bears with hounds. Now down in this south country, and we had 2 up there because of predator. The bears were eat us up if we didn't work at them, and then we figured out that there's guys that would pay to go
You can get rid of the problem and you can make a little money.
and make a little money because, when you're feeding 30 hounds, it costs a lot per day. Oh, we don't. We didn't really down here for anything. I loved hunting dogs, and there wasn't, down here. You got to have a lot of time. It's a very time-consuming thing to train them, and then to keep them in shape, and and when we were up there, but down here, I didn't really have the time to keep a set of hounds working. I kept Catahoula, cow dogs, but I didn't. And I, down here, I decided, and I started training Brittany Spaniels to hunt quail,
I was going to ask you, what were you doing with the Brittany's?
and
Bird dogs.
yeah, bird dogs.
Yeah.
And then we got in the drought in '97, lost all of our quail. I mean, there's maybe 5% of the birds that we had back in the '90s. And with that 10-year drought, we don't have any.
And it hasn't come back?
No, here at the house, I have not shot a bird in 12, 13 years.
And in heyday, when it was really good and there were a lot of birds?
Oh, I'd take hunters out. We'd go quail hunting here on the ranch, and we usually wouldn't overshoot them, and everybody could get to kill a few birds. Limit was 12, and I mean there was sometimes that if it was late in the year and stuff, and conditions was good, we might kill 8 or 10 apiece. But I have not shot in '97. That drought started, and we went from you go to a water, a cattle water area, and you'd have two coveys, at least a couple of coveys of 15 birds apiece that would come drink the water, and if there was any feed grain or anything. I had 200 birds that roosted in these trees right here. I'm just guessing, but probably 200 birds that would roost in those trees just at dark every night. You'd see them flying in. And now I haven't seen, in 7 years, I have not seen a quail. And we never shot the quail here at the house. That was house birds. And we had a boundary, and if they got out past it, and everything, we didn't anywhere close. But that quail's a very fragile animal. They're little, they weather, and we've drought. There's no feed, so that hurt it for years. And then we've had late, cold, freezing rains in October in the last few years, and that just wipes your quail out.
How about deer? Did you hunt deer?
Yeah, down here in the valley, there's always a few deer, and mule deer, but I always we'd hunt mule deer, but I liked hunting coos deer because it's more of a challenge. It's spot and stalk,
And where would you do that?
Oh, just in the mountains, in the Chiricahuas or the Palencias, either one.
Did you ever spend much time up in the mountains just roaming around, or you didn't have time for it?
Well, we spent a lot of time roaming around, but we had a goal for it. Another one of my stories that I probably made me more famous and made everybody cuss me more than anybody was about 10 years ago. I got we drought out, and then we come back and started raining, and we needed to put some cattle up on the forest leases. So I come up with this idea that we would use, instead of putting cows and calves and trying to get them located, I would buy these old wore out roping steers, and I'd winter them up on the mountain and get them up ready to go to feedlot when I come out with them. Well, I decided, these roping steers, they can't be hard to gather because they've been fooled with all their life.
Okay.
It only took me 3 years to gather. And the last steer I gathered, I shot him with a rifle up in Cave Creek.
Go ahead.
They were anywhere from up at the north end of the Chiricahuas, up here by Bowie San Simon. I've had them over on the Elfrida side. I had them down on the south end, down here on the ranches on the south end of the forest. They went everywhere. And the last steer we gathered, I mean, it took us this was like 5 years later.
Okay.
And I knew I was still short 2 steers, and I figured, they died or something.
Yeah.
The Forest Service called me and said, "What are you going to do about your steer?" I said, "Nothing." They said, "How do you know it?" I said, "How do you know it's yours?" Well, and so they sent me a picture, and here it had the brand like it was a neon light right on this steer's ribs. And I said, "Well, I told them, I says, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to print up tickets and we'll have a steer hunt. We'll raffle him off." "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that." And I said, "Okay. Well, we'll sell hunting tickets, to hunt." "You can't do that." And I says, "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just give him to you guys here at the Forest Service. I'll just write you a bill of sale and you can have him. Then you can do whatever you want with him." "Oh, you can't do that either." And I says, "Well, I said, I'm not going to spend $250 a day for a crew of cowboys to hunt a $150 steer."
Right.
I said, "If he shows up somewhere," and he finally showed up down around the foot of the mountain, down low, and I snuck in the next day, and we shot him and hauled him out and butchered him and everything. And that steer lived through the Horseshoe Fire 1. He lived through the Horseshoe Fire 2.
And he was just wandering. So tell me about Forest Service leases and cattle. I don't know anything about how does that work.
Well,
was this the one time you did it? You didn't usually.
No, we had a lease since the first lease my granddad had bought was in about 1950.
Okay.
And then I bought a neighboring lease about it was about 20 years later. And these are not year-long leases. They're from the growing season. You supposed to have the cattle off of the leases I had.
Okay, and when would that be?
Yeah, it would be. You had to have cattle off from June through November.
Okay, and a lease, I really don't know anything about it. A lease allows you to graze so many that they tell
Right.
cattle on this area.
Right.
Okay.
That's the simplified way to put it. You have certain area on the national forest, and you own the grazing permit.
Okay.
It's something that you can buy, sell.
Yeah.
It has to be approved by the Forest Service, but you actually sell the permit to run cattle.
And would they measure the area by
Oh yeah,
acres or?
by acres, and then they'd have transects all over your permit, and if it got to graze too low, you had to move your cattle off. And
Oh, I see. They're measuring the
grass and things like that. And
was that worth it to do?
At one time, when it used to be a year-long permit, it was worth it. But since they've got it to where it's so micromanaged by the government and the Forest Service, it's just a real tough deal. It's a young man's deal.
Now, why do you say that?
It's somebody that's got a lot of energy,
Oh,
a lot of ambition, and everything still looks good in front of them.
yeah,
You know, all we see when you get past 60s, you see a flag fluttering up there, and we have a lot of young ranchers and stuff in in the area now. I mean,
good.
second, third generation that want to go back to ranching. We had a generation about like mine that didn't want no part of it. They were sick of it. And
They
then,
wanted to get out and do
yeah, try something else. And then usually by the time they turned, 40, they'd end up back where they started. But no,
grass
that,
is greener.
yeah, and it's just a way of life. But the Forest Service, it was a good way to get into the ranching business without spending a big bunch of money to own the ranch. And it was a good deal. They've got it so over restricted.
Yeah,
There's so many restrictions and so much of this that it takes so much man hours, with $40,000 pickups, $12,000 horse trailers, $400 tires on the ground, $2,000, $1,050 to $2,000 ranch horses to go up and work on this. It doesn't,
it doesn't make sense.
but with it, where you have to move the cattle plumb off and then they have to go back.
Yeah,
Now, over in the country where I was raised before I moved down here, they were all year long permits. And you had summer country and winter country, just like up in Montana and up in there. And there's a lot of those are just term permits also. But down here, it's ranching on the forest. It's a young man's. I don't own any. I've sold out. Back when I had my good dogs and they were working all the time, and somebody would have a bunch of cattle that were real hard together, and it would be in a country, rocks or brush that you couldn't, and you needed dogs, and so I had some good dogs, good hold up dogs, and I'd go take my dogs and a couple of my guys that would work, it helped me all the time, and they could work my dogs as good as I could. And we'd go gather some cattle that had got out and got away, and
how much did I have to pay if it was mine?
a lot of times if it was a neighbor, I wouldn't even charge them because we just trade out work. If I had to pull out and go somewhere and stay for a couple of weeks, I'd charge them, per day. But if it was just, somebody close and they had cattle out and couldn't get them back and stuff,
Yeah.